Hello, everyone. Welcome back to English in Advance. I'm Jessica, your host for today. Have you ever had that frustrating feeling? You spend an hour learning a list of new English words. You feel confident, you feel smart, but the next day, poof, they are gone from your memory. It's like trying to hold water in your hands. If you've felt this, I want you to know that you are not alone. So many English learners face this exact problem. But what if I told you that your memory isn't the problem? The problem is the method. What if there was a way to learn new vocabulary that actually sticks? A way to build a rich and powerful English vocabulary that you can use confidently in any conversation? Well, you are in the right place. Today we are going to change the way you learn words forever. We won't be looking at boring lists. Instead, we are going to go on a journey through stories. Stories of people just like you, who discovered powerful secrets to making vocabulary a permanent part of their minds. Get ready to listen, learn, and finally, remember. Let's begin. Let's start our journey in the middle of New York City, a place buzzing with energy, a symphony of car horns, distant sirens, and the chatter of 1,000 different languages. In the middle of all this was Mark. Mark was on his dream vacation, but right now it felt more like a nightmare. He clutched a map in his hands. The paper was starting to get soft from his nervous sweat. Everything looked so different from the pictures. The buildings were taller, the crowds were bigger, and he was completely, utterly lost. He felt a rising sense of panic, a feeling of being small and invisible in a giant city. He was starting to feel quite anxious. This word, anxious, perfectly described the worried and nervous feeling in his stomach. He was anxious about being late to meet his friend, anxious about being in this unfamiliar place alone. His goal was to find the Empire State Building. On his map, it was marked with a star and the word landmark. He had seen that word before, but its meaning was a little fuzzy. He looked around at the sea of yellow taxis and towering glass buildings. He needed to find a way to maps this concrete jungle. The word maps seemed so formal. It meant to find a way to get to a place. He had to navigate through the crowded sidewalks, navigate the confusing street signs, and navigate his own feelings of being overwhelmed. He took a deep breath. Looking at a list of words in a book was one thing, but being here, living the meaning of the words, was something else entirely. He was learning vocabulary from the world around him, from the situation he was in. And this brings us to our very first, and perhaps most important, strategy for learning vocabulary so that you never forget it. It's called learning from context. Context is the situation, the story, the environment around a word. When you learn a word from context, you're not just memorizing a definition, you are connecting the word to a feeling, a place, an image, and a real experience. Think about Mark. He didn't learn the word anxious from a dictionary. He learned it from the feeling in his own stomach, the fast beat of his own heart. The word anxious now, for him, is connected to the memory of the tall buildings and the loud New York streets. That's a powerful connection, much stronger than just reading anxious means worried. Let's look at his other words, landmark. He saw it on the map next to a picture of a famous building. He looked up and saw other famous buildings. He realized a landmark is an important, easily recognized building or place. The context of the map and the city itself taught him the meaning. It wasn't just a word, it was a star on a map and a real building he was searching for. And the word, maps. He needed to find his way, the action of looking at the map, planning his route, and moving through the city. That was the context for maps. He was actively doing it. So how can you use this method? You need to become a word detective. When you are reading an article, listening to a podcast like this one, or watching a movie, don't just skip over words you don't know. Look at the words around it. Look at the situation. Who is speaking? What is happening? Let's practice with a sentence. Imagine you read this. After the long hike, the man felt completely exhausted and collapsed onto his bed. Maybe you don't know exhausted, but look at the context. He went on a long hike. What happens after a long hike? You feel tired. What did he do? He collapsed onto his bed. This action also suggests he was very tired. So, exhausted must mean extremely tired. You figured it out without a dictionary. Now, your brain has a little story connected to the word exhausted. The long hike, collapsing on the bed. That story makes the word memorable. Let's go back to Mark. He decided to use the context around him. He saw a police officer and decided to ask for help. He took another deep breath to calm his anxious feelings. He walked up to her and said, "Excuse me, I'm a bit lost. I'm trying to navigate to a famous landmark." He pointed to the Empire State Building on his map. The officer smiled kindly. "You're anxious, but don't worry, you're quite close," she said. "The easiest way to navigate from here is to take the subway 2 stops downtown." She pointed him toward the station. Mark felt a wave of relief. He had not only understood the words, he had used them. He had lived them. And as he walked towards the subway, he knew he would never forget what anxious landmark and maps meant. He didn't just learn 3 words. He learned how to survive in a new city. Our next story takes us to a very different place. Not a chaotic city street, but the hot, loud, and organized chaos of a professional kitchen. Here we meet Maria. Maria was a young chef, full of passion and ambition. She had just started her dream job at a high-end French restaurant. The head chef, Chef Antoine, was a legend, but he was also incredibly demanding. He moved through the kitchen with precision and intensity. He would shout orders in a mix of English and French. Maria was trying her best to keep up, but she was struggling with the new vocabulary. Every day, Chef Antoine would use words she had never heard before. Words like culinary. He would say, "Your culinary skills are good, but they must be perfect." Maria understood from the context that culinary had to do with cooking. It means related to the kitchen or cooking. Another word he used constantly was meticulous. He would inspect every plate before it left the kitchen. "The presentation must be meticulous," he'd declare, wiping a tiny drop of sauce from the edge of a plate. Maria could see what he meant. Meticulous meant paying extreme attention to every small detail. It meant being perfect. And finally, there was the word garnish. Chef Antoine would say, "Where is the garnish? This dish is not finished without the garnish." He would then place a tiny delicate herb on top of the food. So, a garnish was a small decoration added to food to make it look better. Maria would write these words down in a little notebook she kept in her pocket. Culinary, meticulous, garnish. At the end of her long 12-hour shift, she would go home and study them. But the next day, in the heat of the kitchen, with Chef Antoine shouting, the words would vanish from her mind. She felt inadequate, like she wasn't good enough for the job. The list in her notebook was getting longer and longer, and her confidence was getting smaller and smaller. Maria's problem is very common. She was reviewing the words, but she was reviewing them in the wrong way. This brings us to our second powerful technique, the spaced repetition system, or SRS. This sounds very scientific, but the idea is actually very simple. Imagine you are trying to remember something. You forget it over time, right? The forgetting curve is a concept that shows how information is lost over time when you don't try to retain it. You forget things very quickly at first, and then the rate of forgetting slows down. Spaced repetition works by interrupting this forgetting curve. It reminds you of the word right before you are about to forget it. Each time you remember the word, you can wait longer before you need to review it again. It's like magic for your memory. So, how does it work in practice? You don't need to create a complicated calendar. There are amazing apps for this. Anki and Quizlet are two very popular ones. You simply create a digital flashcard. On the front, you put the new word, for example, meticulous. On the back, you put the definition, paying extreme attention to detail, and maybe a sentence you heard like, "The chef was meticulous about the presentation." Then you let the app do the work. The app will show you the card. You try to remember the meaning. Then you flip the card. You tell the app if it was easy, good, or hard for you to remember. Based on your answer, the app's algorithm decides when to show you that card again. If it was hard, you might see it again in 1 minute. If it was easy, you might not see it again for 4 days. The next time you get it right, you might not see it for 10 days, then a month, and so on. This is so much more efficient than just reading a list of words over and over. You spend your time on the words you are struggling with. And you don't waste time on the words you already know well. Let's imagine Maria discovers this system. One evening, instead of just staring at her notebook, she downloads a spaced repetition app. She spends 20 minutes creating her first set of cards. Card 1, culinary. On the back, related to cooking. Chef Antoine talks about my culinary skills. Card 2, meticulous. On the back, paying extreme attention to detail. Every plate must be meticulous. Card 3, garnish. On the back, a decoration for food, a small herb on top of the steak. The next day, on her bus ride to work, she opens the app. It shows her culinary. She remembers. Easy. It shows her meticulous. She remembers. Good. It shows her garnish. She remembers. Easy. The app tells her she's done for now. It took her less than a minute. A few days pass. Maria is in the kitchen. Chef Antoine is inspecting her dish. "This is good work," he says. "Your attention to detail is becoming more meticulous. But it needs a garnish." And this time, Maria didn't panic. The word was right there in her mind. She knew exactly what he meant. She quickly added the small herb. Chef Antoine nodded, almost smiling. Maria felt a surge of pride. The spaced repetition system wasn't just helping her remember words. It was helping her succeed in her dream job. It turned her feeling of being inadequate into a feeling of competence. Now it's your turn to practice. Think of a word you have learned recently but are struggling to remember. Pause for a moment. Now imagine creating a digital flashcard for it. What would you put on the front? The word itself. What would you put on the back? Not just the definition. Add a personal sentence or the context where you heard it. This small step of creating the card is the first step to mastering the word. If you do this for every new important word you learn, You will build a vocabulary that truly lasts. Let's move on to our third story. This one is about a university student named David. David was a history major, and he had a huge final exam coming up. The exam covered the entire American Revolution. There were so many names, dates, and concepts to remember. David was a good student. He spent hours in the library every day. His textbook was full of yellow highlighter marks. He had pages and pages of notes. He would read his notes over and over again. He'd read a chapter in the textbook. Then he'd read it again. He felt like he was studying hard. But whenever he tried to explain a concept to a friend or answer a question from a practice test, his mind would go blank. He could recognize the words in his notes, but he couldn't produce the information himself. He was particularly struggling with abstract nouns like consequence, revolution, and significant. He knew what a revolution was. Generally, it was a big change in government, like the American Revolution. But what was the consequence of a specific event, like the Boston Tea Party? A consequence is a result or effect of an action. And what made an event significant? Significant means important enough to be worthy of attention. He would read the definitions, and they made sense. But during the practice test, he couldn't recall them. He was highlighting, he was rereading, but he was not truly learning. He was passively looking at the information. His brain was not working hard enough to build strong connections. David's problem introduces our third vital technique, active recall. It is the opposite of what David was doing. Passive review is reading or listening. Active recall is actively retrieving information from your brain. It is closing the book and asking yourself, what did I just read? It is looking at a word and forcing your brain to remember the meaning without any clues. It's a test for your brain. And just like lifting weights makes your muscles stronger, forcing your brain to recall information makes your memory of that information stronger. Every time you successfully pull a piece of information from your memory, you are telling your brain, hey, this is important. Keep this. Rereading is comfortable. Active recall can feel difficult, but that difficulty, that mental struggle, is exactly what makes the information stick. So, how could David use active recall? Instead of rereading his notes, he could have covered them with a piece of paper and tried to rewrite them from memory. After he finished, he could compare his version with the original notes to see what he missed. For his vocabulary words, instead of just reading the list of words and definitions, he could create simple questions for himself. For example, he could write on one side of a card, "What is a consequence?" and on the other, "A result or effect of an action." This is the basis of flashcards, which combines active recall with the spaced repetition we just talked about. He could also try to explain the concepts out loud to an empty chair or to his roommate. The act of explaining forces you to organize your thoughts and retrieve the information. Let's imagine David has a week left before his exam. He's frustrated and tired. His friend, Sarah, sees him just staring at his highlighted textbook. She asks him what's wrong, and he explains his problem. Sarah tells him about active recall. She says, "Stop reading. Start quizzing." David is skeptical, but he's desperate, so he decides to try it. He puts away his textbook. He takes out a blank piece of paper and writes at the top, "The Boston Tea Party." Then he writes everything he can remember about it. What was it? Why did it happen? What was the consequence? Why was it a significant event that helped start the revolution? At first it's hard. He can only remember a few things. His page has a lot of empty space. He feels a little stupid, but then he opens his book and checks. He fills in the gaps with a different colored pen. The next day, he does it again. This time, he remembers more. The page has less empty space. He does this for every major topic. He makes flashcards for all the key vocabulary. One side says, "Why was the Battle of Saratoga significant?" The other side explains why it was a turning point. He's not just reading anymore. He's actively engaging with the material. He is forcing his brain to work. The day of the exam arrives. David sits down, looks at the questions, and a strange thing happens. The answers just flow. He can remember the connections between events. He can explain the consequence of each action. He can argue why one event was more significant than another. He doesn't just recognize the words, he understands them and can use them. He aces the exam. The difference was not studying more hours. The difference was changing how he studied. He switched from passive rereading to active recall. Let's do a quick active recall practice right now. I have mentioned 3 techniques so far. Can you name them? Don't just think about it. Say them out loud if you can. Pause the podcast and try. The first was learning from context, like Mark in New York. The second was the spaced repetition system, like Maria the chef. And the third was active recall, like David the student. See? That little struggle to remember makes the memory stronger. Use this powerful tool in your own learning. Don't just listen to English. Don't just read English. Actively recall what you are learning. Quiz yourself. Explain it to someone. That is how you turn fragile knowledge into deep, lasting understanding. Our journey now takes us into the sleek, modern world of a corporate office. We meet Sarah, a project manager who is brilliant at her job. Her company is expanding globally, and Sarah has a huge opportunity to lead a project with a team from the United States. She's excited, but also nervous. Her English is good for everyday conversation, but she's not confident with business English. She worries about sounding unprofessional. She starts trying to learn new words she finds in business articles, words like leverage, synergy, consensus. She learns their definitions: leverage, to use something to maximum advantage; synergy, the idea that when people work together, they can achieve more than the sum of their individual efforts; consensus, a general agreement. She memorizes these words, but in her first video call with the American team, she feels stuck. The conversation moves so fast, they use phrases she's never heard before. Her team lead says, "We need to reach a consensus on this issue by Friday." Sarah knows the word reach and she knows the word consensus, but the phrase together feels new. Later, someone says, "I think we can leverage our existing customer base to promote the new product." Again, she knows leverage, but the way it's used with other words is what matters. She realizes that learning single words is not enough. English speakers don't talk in single words. They talk in phrases, in groups of words that often go together. These word partnerships are called collocations, or chunks. This brings us to our fourth powerful strategy, learning in chunks. Stop thinking about vocabulary as a list of individual bricks. Start thinking about it as pre-built sections of a wall. Learning words in chunks makes you sound more natural and fluent. For example, English speakers don't usually say make a photo, they say take a photo. They don't say a strong rain, they say heavy rain. These are chunks. When you learn these chunks, you don't have to think about which words go together. You have the whole phrase ready in your mind. This makes speaking smoother and faster because your brain has less work to do. You are retrieving one chunk of information, not 3 or 4 individual words. How can you start learning in chunks? When you learn a new word, don't just write down the word itself. Write down the words that it is commonly used with. Pay attention to these chunks when you are reading or listening. Let's take Sarah's word, consensus. Instead of just learning consensus, she should learn the chunks. To reach a consensus, to build a consensus, or a general consensus. For leverage, she could learn to leverage our strengths, to leverage technology. Notice that these chunks often involve a verb and a noun, or an adjective and a noun. For example, instead of just learning the word mistake, you could learn to make a mistake. Instead of decision, to make a decision. It seems like a small change, but it has a huge impact on your fluency. Let's go back to Sarah. After that first difficult meeting, she changes her learning strategy. She starts a new section in her notebook called Business Chunks. When she reads an article and sees the phrase competitive edge, she doesn't just write down edge. She writes down the whole chunk, gain a competitive edge. When she hears her boss talk about the bottom line, she writes down that phrase, which means the final profit or the most important point. She creates flashcards with these chunks. On one side, how do you say, get a general agreement? On the other, to reach a consensus. You. She practices saying them out loud. She starts to think in phrases, not just words. A few weeks later, it's time for another big meeting. This time, Sarah feels different. She has prepared. When the topic of marketing comes up, she says, I believe we can leverage our social media presence to connect with a younger audience. The words come out smoothly and naturally. Later, when there's a disagreement about the project timeline, she says, this is a difficult point. It's important that we build a consensus as a team before we move forward. Let's discuss the pros and cons. Her American colleagues nod in agreement. She's not just participating in the meeting anymore. She is leading the conversation. She sounds clear, confident, and professional. She didn't just learn a list of business words. She learned how to use them in the right way, in the right context, as part of natural-sounding phrases. So here is your practice. Take a common word like job. Don't just think about the word job. What chunks can you make with it? You can look for a job, apply for a job, get a job, lose your job. You can have a full-time job or a part-time job. You can have a dream job. See how many connections you can make. From now on, when you learn a new noun, look for the verbs that go with it. When you learn a new adjective, look for the nouns it describes. Become a collector of chunks, not just a collector of words. Let's leave the corporate world behind and step into a quiet, cozy room filled with the smell of old books and fresh coffee. Here we find Leo, a young man who dreams of being a writer. Leo loves words. He collects them like other people collect stamps. But he has a problem. He wants to write beautiful, descriptive sentences, but he struggles to remember the powerful, imaginative words he finds. He would read a word like ethereal, which means extremely delicate and light in a way that seems not to be of this world. He loved the sound of it, or cacophony, a harsh, unpleasant mixture of sounds, or serene, which means calm and peaceful. He would write them down, but when he sat down to write his own stories, the words would not come to him. They were like beautiful butterflies he saw once but couldn't catch. Leo's challenge is common for creative people. He wants to remember abstract sensory words, and simple definitions are not enough. He needs a different kind of hook for his memory. This leads us to our fifth strategy, which is all about creativity. Using mnemonics and word association. A mnemonic, the M is silent, is a memory device. It's a trick you use to help you remember something. This can be a rhyme, an acronym, or a vivid mental image. Word association is similar. It's about connecting a new, difficult word to something you already know very well, like an image, a sound, a feeling, or another word in your own language. This technique works because our brains are fantastic at remembering strange, funny, or emotional images. We are visual creatures. We often forget names, but we remember faces. By creating a picture for a word, you give your brain a visual clue to hold on to. Let's see how Leo could use this. Take the word ethereal. The definition is a bit abstract, but what if Leo closes his eyes and imagines a ghost? A very friendly, beautiful ghost made of soft white light, floating through the air. The ghost is so light it seems otherworldly. He can connect that image to the word ethereal. Ethereal. A floating ghost. The image is memorable. Now, for cacophony. This word sounds a bit like cough, and a symphony is a beautiful sound. So maybe he imagines a symphony orchestra where all the musicians are coughing instead of playing their instruments. A coughing symphony. That would be a horrible, harsh, unpleasant mixture of sounds. It's a silly image, but he will never forget it. A cacophony is a coughing symphony. Finally, the word serene. This sounds a little like the name Serena. Maybe Leo imagines a woman named Serena sitting peacefully by a calm lake at sunset. The water is perfectly still. The air is quiet. The scene is completely serene. Serena is serene. This method is deeply personal. The crazier and funnier your mental image, the better it will stick in your memory. It doesn't have to make sense to anyone else. It just has to make sense to you. You are creating a unique, strong connection in your brain between the new word and an existing memory or image. So, Leo decides to try this. He creates a special notebook, not for definitions, but for his word pictures. For every new word he wants to learn, he draws a little cartoon or writes down a crazy sentence. For the word gargantuan, which means enormous, he draws a giant car in a tiny garage. For the word somber, which means dark or sad, he imagines a robot that only plays sad songs. His notebook starts to fill up with these strange, wonderful ideas. A few weeks later, he's writing a scene in his novel. He's describing a forest at dawn. He wants to capture the magical quality of the light filtering through the trees. He thinks for a moment, and the image of the floating, beautiful ghost pops into his head. The word comes with it, ethereal. He writes, "The morning light was ethereal, turning the mist into a silver blanket." Later, he describes a busy market. He wants to capture the noise. He remembers his silly image of the coughing orchestra. The word comes to him, cacophony. He writes, "He stepped into the market and was hit by a cacophony of shouting vendors and crying babies." He was no longer just collecting words. He was using them. He had found a way to catch the butterflies and put them into his stories. Now it's your turn to be creative. Let's take the word resilient. Resilient means able to withstand or recover quickly from difficult conditions. Can you create a mnemonic or a mental image for it? Pause and think for a moment. Maybe you think of a rubber band. You can stretch it, but it always bounces back to its original shape. A rubber band is resilient. Or maybe the word resilient sounds a bit like reseal it. You can imagine a plastic bag that you open, but then you can reseal it easily and it's good as new. It recovers from being opened. It's a silly connection, but it works. Try this technique with the next difficult word you encounter. Don't just learn its meaning. Give it a personality, a picture, a story. Make it unforgettable. Our next story introduces us to Emily. Emily was learning English in her home country, and she was very good at it. On paper, she could read articles, understand grammar rules, and get high scores on vocabulary tests. But there was one big problem. She was terrified of speaking. She had recently found a language exchange partner online, a native English speaker from California named Jake. They agreed to talk on video call for an hour every week. Before their first call, Emily prepared. She wrote down a list of new, intelligent words she wanted to use. Words like articulate and eloquent. Articulate means being able to express ideas and feelings clearly. Eloquent is similar. It means being fluent or persuasive in speaking or writing. She wanted to sound smart. But when the call started and Jake's friendly face appeared on the screen, Emily froze. All the beautiful words flew out of her head. She would start a sentence, then hesitate, which means to pause before saying or doing something because you are uncertain. She was so worried about making a mistake or using a word incorrectly that she ended up saying very little at all. She used simple, safe words. The conversation felt awkward. When the call ended, Emily felt deeply disappointed in herself. Emily's fear is something many language learners experience. It's called the gap between passive knowledge and active knowledge. You might know a word when you read or hear it, passive, but you can't use it yourself in speaking or writing, active. And this brings us to our sixth strategy, which is perhaps the most obvious but also the most ignored. You must use the new words. Learning a word isn't complete when you understand its meaning. It's complete when you can produce it yourself in the right situation. Speaking and writing are not just ways to show what you know. They are powerful ways to learn. When you force yourself to use a new word in a sentence, you are creating new pathways in your brain. You are moving the word from your words I understand box to your words I can use box. And yes, you might make mistakes. You might use the word in a slightly wrong way. But that's okay. Mistakes are part of the learning process. It's better to try and fail than to never try at all. So how can you practice this? If you have a language partner like Emily does, that's perfect. Before your conversation, choose just 3 or 4 new words you want to practice. Don't choose 20, just a few. This is your mission for the conversation. Find a natural way to use these words. If you don't have a language partner, talk to yourself. This might sound strange, but it is incredibly effective. Describe your room using new adjectives. Explain your opinion on a news story out loud. Or you can start a journal. Every day, write a few sentences about your day and try to include 1 or 2 new words you learned. The key is to move from being a passive consumer of English to an active creator of English. Let's go back to Emily and Jake. After their first awkward call, Emily almost gave up, but Jake sent her a kind message. He said, "I could tell you were nervous. Don't worry about being perfect. The goal is just to communicate." This encouraged Emily. For their next call, she decided to try a new approach. She chose just 3 words: hesitate, articulate, and eloquent. During the conversation, Jake asked her about a book she was reading. This was her chance. She took a deep breath and said, "Well, I hesitate to give my full opinion because I haven't finished it yet. She did it. She used one of her words. Jake just nodded and smiled, encouraging her to continue. A little later, they were talking about a politician. Emily said, "I don't agree with his ideas, but I have to admit he is very eloquent. He speaks so well." Another success. Towards the end of the call, she felt brave enough to talk about her own struggles. She said, "My goal is to be more articulate in English. Sometimes I have the ideas in my head, but I can't find the right words." Jake understood completely. He told her his Spanish was the same. At the end of that call, Emily felt amazing. She hadn't been perfect, but she had been brave. She had taken the words from her notebook and brought them to life in a real conversation. She was actively building her fluency, one word at a time. Your practice task for this technique is simple. Choose one, just one, new word you've learned recently. Your mission for the next 24 hours is to use that word. Say it out loud in a sentence to yourself. Write it in an email. Leave a comment on a YouTube video using it. The action doesn't have to be big, but you have to actively produce it. Take the word out of your brain and put it into the world. That is how a word truly becomes yours. Our next story is about a curious teenager named Alex. Alex didn't love studying English grammar in school, but he loved puzzles and games. He loved taking things apart to see how they worked. One day, he was looking at a list of English words for a test, and he noticed something interesting. He saw the word unhappy. He knew happy, and he knew un meant not, so unhappy meant not happy. Then he saw the word rewrite. He knew right. And he remembered from a video game that when you respawn, you appear again. So must mean again. Rewrite means to write again. Suddenly, English vocabulary wasn't a list of random words anymore. It was a puzzle. It was like a set of building blocks. The words were made of smaller pieces. Alex's discovery leads us to our seventh powerful technique, understanding prefixes, suffixes, and root words. Think of them as the secret code of English. If you can learn the meaning of these common word parts, you can unlock the meaning of thousands of words you have never even seen before. A prefix is a small part added to the beginning of a word that changes its meaning. We saw un, not, and re, again. Other common ones are pre, before, like in preview, to see before, and miss, wrongly, like in misunderstand, to understand wrongly. A suffix is a small part added to the end of a word. Suffixes often change the word type. For example, the suffix -able or -ible means can be done. A book that is readable is a book that can be read. A problem that is solvable can be solved. The suffix -tin often turns a verb into a noun. The verb create becomes the noun creation. The verb inform becomes the noun information. The root word is the main part of the word that contains the basic meaning. For example, in the words export, import, and transport, the root is port, which comes from Latin and means to carry. So export is to carry out of a country, import is to carry into a country, and transport is to carry across from one place to another. Learning these word parts is like getting a superpower. Instead of having to learn every single word as a new piece of information, you start to see patterns. You can make intelligent guesses about the meanings of new words. This is an incredibly efficient way to expand your vocabulary, especially for academic or formal English, which uses many words with Latin and Greek roots. So Alex the puzzle solver turns into Alex the word detective. He starts a new notebook where he collects prefixes and suffixes. When he learns that bio means life, he suddenly understands a whole family of words. Biology, the study of life. Biography, the story of a life. Biodegradable, able to be broken down by living things. When he learns that the suffix less means without, he understands homeless, without a home, careless, without care, and endless, without an end. He starts to see these patterns everywhere. One day in his science class, his teacher uses the word unpredictable. A year ago, Alex would have been confused, but now he breaks it down like a puzzle. He sees the root dict, which he learned means to say or to speak, like in dictionary. He sees the prefix pre, which means before. So predict means to say before it happens. He sees the suffix able, which means can be done. So predictable means it can be said before it happens. And finally, he sees the prefix, which means not. So unpredictable means it cannot be said before it happens. He figured out the meaning of a long, complex word all by himself, just by knowing the parts. He felt like he had cracked a code. For your practice, let's take a common root, vis or vid, which means to see. Can you think of any English words that have this root? Pause and think for a moment. You might have thought of video, which is something you see, or vision, which is your ability to see. What about television? Tele means far away, and vis means to see. So a television is a machine that lets you see things from far away. What about invisible? In means not, vis means see, and able means can be done. So something that is invisible cannot be seen. By knowing just one small root, vis, you can understand a whole network of words. Start paying attention to these word parts. When you look up a new word, take an extra moment to see if it has a common prefix, suffix, or root. This detective work will pay off enormously in the long run. Now, let's go to a quiet, comfortable space. We meet Maya, a thoughtful woman who decided to start a journal. Her goal was to improve her English writing, but she also wanted a private place to explore her thoughts and feelings. At first, her journal entries were simple. Today was a good day. I went to work. I met my friend for coffee. But she wanted to express herself more precisely. She started to look for new words to describe her feelings. One day, she was looking at old photographs from her childhood. She felt a mix of happiness and sadness for the past. She looked up this feeling and found the perfect word, nostalgic. It means feeling happy and also slightly sad when you think about things that happened in the past. She wrote in her journal, "Looking at these old photos made me feel so nostalgic for our family vacations." Another day, she had to make a big decision about a job offer. It was a great opportunity, but it meant moving to a new city. She had good reasons to accept it and good reasons to reject it. She felt torn. She searched for a word to describe this feeling of having two opposing feelings at the same time and found the word ambivalent. She wrote, "I feel completely ambivalent about the new job. My head says yes, but my heart says no." A few weeks later, her sister called with amazing news. She was getting married. Maya was overjoyed. She felt pure, soaring happiness. The word happy just didn't seem strong enough. She found the word jubilant, which means feeling or expressing great happiness, especially because of a success. She wrote, "I was jubilant when I heard my sister's news. I can't stop smiling." What Maya was doing, perhaps without even realizing it, is our 8th powerful strategy, personalization. This is the process of connecting a new word directly to your own life, your memories, your opinions, and your emotions. When you personalize a word, you are not just creating a memory for it, you are weaving it into the fabric of who you are. The memory of the word nostalgic for Maya is now forever linked to the real memory of her own family photos. The word ambivalent is connected to the real, difficult emotion she felt about that job offer. These personal connections are incredibly strong and durable. A personalized word is not just a piece of data in your brain, it's part of your story. It's a word you have lived. How can you use personalization? When you learn a new word, don't just write a generic example sentence. Write a sentence that is true for you. Let's take the word procrastinate, which means to delay doing something that you must do. A generic sentence is, many students procrastinate. That's not very memorable. A personalized sentence is, I always procrastinate when I have to do my taxes. Or, I need to stop procrastinating and clean my kitchen. Because this sentence is about your real life, it has more emotional weight and will be much easier to remember. You can also ask yourself questions. When you learn the word generous, ask yourself, who is the most generous person I know? What did they do that was generous? When you learn the adjective dreadful, ask yourself, what is a dreadful movie I have seen recently? By answering these questions, you are forcing your brain to create a personal link to the new word. Maya continued with her journal. It became her personal dictionary, a record of her life told through new vocabulary. When she felt annoyed by the loud construction outside her window, she learned and used the word exasperated. When she felt amazed by a beautiful sunset, she learned and used the word breathtaking. Her journal was not just a language learning tool anymore. It was helping her understand her own life more deeply. The new words gave her new tools to think with. And because every word was tied to a real memory or a real emotion, she almost never forgot them. They had become part of her. So here is your practice task. Think about a word you learned this week. Now connect it to your life. Write down one sentence that uses this word and is 100% true for you. For example, if the word is exhausted, you could write, after playing with my kids all day yesterday, I was completely exhausted. Pause and create your own personal sentence now. By doing this, you have just made that word significantly more memorable. Make this a regular habit. Don't just learn about English words. Make English words about you. Let's take a walk into a beautiful, peaceful garden. Here we meet Mr. Henderson, an old man with kind eyes and hands that showed a lifetime of working with the soil. A young neighbor of his, Tom, was trying to learn Japanese, and he was complaining to Mr. Henderson. I don't get it, Tom said. I use my flashcard app every day. I learn 10 new words, but then a week later, I feel like I've forgotten half of them. It's so much work for so little progress. Mr. Henderson smiled and pointed to a small patch of new seedlings in his garden. Learning words, he said, is a lot like gardening. You can't just put a seed in the ground and walk away. You have to nurture it. Tom looked at the tiny green plants. Nurture. It was a new word for him. Mr. Henderson explained, to nurture something means to care for and protect it while it is growing. You have to give these little plants water every day. You have to make sure they get enough sun. You have to protect them from pests. He continued, your new words are like these seedlings. They are very fragile at first. If you don't give them attention, they will wither and die in your memory. You have to be persistent. Persistent was another new word. Mr. Henderson explained that being persistent means continuing to do something in a determined way, even when it is difficult. You can't just water the garden once a month. You have to be persistent and do it every day or every few days. The same is true for your words. You can't just review them once, you have to keep coming back to them. Finally, Mr. Henderson pointed to a large, beautiful rose bush full of flowers. But if you are persistent, if you nurture your new words consistently over time, they will flourish. To flourish means to grow or develop in a healthy and vigorous way. They will grow from weak little seedlings into strong, beautiful plants. They will become a permanent part of your garden, a permanent part of your mind. Mr. Henderson's gardening analogy is a beautiful way to understand our 9th key strategy, the power of review. We've already talked about spaced repetition, which is a smart way to schedule your reviews. But the underlying principle is simple and crucial. You must review. There are no magic tricks to avoid this. Forgetting is a natural process. Reviewing is the act of fighting against that natural process. The goal of learning vocabulary is not to learn a word once. It's to move that word from your short-term memory, which is like the surface of the soil, down into your long-term memory, which is like the deep roots of a plant. And the only way to do that is through repeated exposure and review over time. So what does a good review system look like? It should be consistent and active. Consistency means making it a habit. Maybe you review your flashcards for 10 minutes every morning with your coffee, or for 15 minutes on the bus to work. The timing doesn't matter as much as the regularity. It's better to review for 10 minutes every day than for 2 hours once a week. And the review must be active, not passive. This goes back to our principle of active recall. Don't just read your word list. Test yourself. Use flashcards. Cover the definition and try to remember it. Cover the word and try to remember it from the definition. Write sentences using the words. The more you force your brain to retrieve the information, the stronger the memory will become. Tom took Mr. Henderson's advice to heart. He realized he was treating vocabulary like a sprint, trying to learn as much as possible as quickly as possible. He needed to treat it like a marathon, or like gardening. He set up a simple review schedule. Every day, he spent 10 minutes reviewing his SRS flashcards. At the end of each week, on Sunday morning, he would take 30 minutes to actively use the words he had learned that week. He would write a short story or a journal entry trying to include all of them. At first, it felt slow, but after a few weeks, he noticed a huge change. The words started to stick. He wasn't forgetting as much. He felt more confident. He understood that he was in the process of nurturing his new vocabulary. He was being persistent, and he knew that eventually his Japanese skills would truly begin to flourish. Your practice for this principle is to make a plan. Right now, think about your week. Where can you find 10 minutes each day to review your English vocabulary? Maybe it's when you first wake up before you check your phone. Maybe it's during your lunch break. Find a time and commit to it for 1 week. Don't just hope you'll review. Schedule it. Treat it like an important appointment. Because it is. It's your appointment with a better, stronger English vocabulary. Our journey now takes us to the bright, clean studio of an architect named Chloe. Chloe was working on a project for a new eco-friendly building. She was reading a lot of articles about sustainable design, and she was encountering a lot of new related vocabulary. Words like sustainable, eco-friendly, biodegradable, and innovative. She understood each word on its own. Sustainable, able to be maintained at a certain level. Eco-friendly, not harmful to the environment. Biodegradable, able to be decomposed by bacteria. Innovative, featuring new methods, advanced and original. The problem was that in her mind, these words were all just floating around in a big, confusing cloud. They were all related to green design, but she didn't have a clear picture of how they connected to each other. When you tried to talk about the concepts in a meeting, she would get them mixed up. Chloe's problem is that she had a list of facts, but she didn't have a mental map. This brings us to our 10th strategy, mind mapping. A mind map is a visual diagram used to organize information. It starts with a central concept in the middle of a page. Then you draw branches out from the center for major ideas and smaller branches for related details. It's a creative and logical way to take notes and organize your thoughts. For vocabulary, mind mapping is incredibly powerful because it helps you see the relationships between words. Instead of learning words in a random list, you learn them in connected groups, organized around a central topic. This mirrors how our brains naturally store information in a network of connections, not in straight lines. This method helps with both memory and understanding. When you remember one word in the group, it can help you remember all the others connected to it. So how could Chloe use this? She takes a large piece of paper and in the center, she writes the main topic, sustainable design. She draws a circle around it. Then she starts to think about the main categories. One category is materials. She draws a branch from the center and labels it materials. Under this branch, she can add words like recycled, bamboo, and biodegradable. She can draw another main branch for energy. Under this branch, she can put words and phrases like solar panels, energy efficient and renewable. Another branch could be goals. Here she could put words like sustainable, eco-friendly, and reduce carbon footprint. As she thinks of new words, she adds them to the map. For the word innovative, she might add it as a smaller branch coming off of solar panels, because new solar panel technology is very innovative. She can use different colors for different branches. She can even add small drawings. For solar panels, she can draw a little sun. For recycled, she can draw the recycling symbol. The process of creating the map, thinking about the categories, making the connections, choosing the colors, is a powerful act of learning. She's not passively receiving information. She is actively organizing it and creating a visual structure for her knowledge. Chloe puts her finished mind map on the wall above her desk. Now, instead of a confusing cloud of words, she has a clear, organized blueprint of the vocabulary for her project. Before her next meeting, she doesn't look at a list. She spends 5 minutes looking at her mind map. In the meeting, when she needs to talk about materials, her brain can easily go to that section of the map and retrieve the related words. She can speak with clarity and confidence, explaining how using innovative, biodegradable materials is a key part of their sustainable design. The mind map didn't just help her memorize words, it helped her understand the topic on a deeper level. Now let's practice this idea together. Let's take the topic emotions. Imagine a circle in the center of a page with the word emotions. What would be the main branches? We could have a branch for happy emotions and a branch for sad emotions. What words could go on the happy emotions branch? We could add joyful, ecstatic, pleased, and the word we learned earlier, jubilant. What about the sad emotions branch? We could add somber, miserable, grief. You can see how this organizes the words in a way that makes sense. Your task is to try this yourself. Choose a topic you are interested in. It could be cooking, sports, technology, anything. Then, find 5 to 10 new English words related to that topic and try to organize them into a simple mind map. You'll be amazed at how much clearer and more connected the vocabulary becomes in your mind. For our final story, we meet Sam. Sam loved American movies. He loved the action, the drama, the humor. He had been learning English for a while, and he had a decent vocabulary, but he wanted to take his listening skills and natural language understanding to the next level. So he decided to do something radical. He decided to watch an entire movie in English, with no subtitles in his own language. He chose a popular superhero movie. He was excited. He sat down with his popcorn. The movie started, and within 5 minutes, Sam was completely lost. The actors were speaking so fast. They were using slang and idioms he had never heard. He felt frustrated and a little stupid. He could only understand maybe 50% of what was being said. His first instinct was to turn on the subtitles, but he resisted. He had a mission. Sam's challenging experience brings us to our 11th and final strategy for building a vocabulary that you will never forget: immersion. Immersion means surrounding yourself with English as much as possible. It means changing your environment so that you are constantly seeing, hearing, and using the language. This might sound extreme, like you have to move to an English-speaking country, but you can create an immersive environment right from your own home. Watching movies in English is one way. Listening to podcasts like this one is another. Changing the language on your phone and computer to English is a powerful step. Reading the news in English, listening to music in English, following American celebrities or influencers on social media, all of these things contribute to your immersion. Immersion works because it makes learning a natural, everyday activity, not just something you do for an hour in a textbook. You learn words in their real, natural context, just like we talked about in our very first story with Mark the Tourist. You begin to absorb the rhythm and flow of the language. At first, immersion can be difficult and uncomfortable, just as it was for Sam. You won't understand everything, and that is perfectly okay. The goal is not 100% comprehension. The goal is exposure. Let's go back to Sam and his movie. He's feeling frustrated, but he decides to keep watching. He stops trying to understand every single word. Instead, he focuses on the big picture. He watches the actors' faces. He listens to the tone of their voice. He pays attention to the music. In a tense scene, he hears the main character talk about his dilemma. Sam doesn't know the word dilemma, but he can see the character is struggling to make a difficult choice between two bad options. The context, the visuals, the music, the acting, tells him the meaning. A dilemma is a situation where you have to make a difficult choice. Later, the hero, who is the protagonist or main character of the story, faces the villain in a final battle. The music is full of suspense, that feeling of excitement or anxiety you have when you wait for something to happen. Sam is learning these words: dilemma, protagonist, suspense, not from a dictionary but from the emotional experience of watching the movie. Sam finishes the movie. He is tired and his brain hurts a little, but he also feels a sense of accomplishment. He didn't understand every line, but he understood the story. The next day, he decides to watch it again, but this time with English subtitles. Now he can connect the words he hears to the words he sees on the screen. He sees the word dilemma in the subtitles right when the character is talking about his difficult choice. The connection becomes even stronger. Over the next few months, Sam makes this his new habit. He watches one American movie every week. He listens to English podcasts on his way to work. He starts reading articles about his favorite movies online in English. Slowly, something amazing begins to happen. The language starts to feel easier. He starts to understand jokes and cultural references. He begins to think in English sometimes. He wasn't just studying English anymore. He was living it. The immersion was working. His vocabulary was growing naturally without the painful effort of memorization. Your practice is to take one small step towards immersion today. What is one thing you normally do in your native language that you can do in English instead? Can you listen to an English song on your way home? Can you watch a 5-minute news clip in English? Can you change the language settings on one app on your phone? Choose one small, manageable action and do it. The journey to fluency is built with thousands of these small steps. Start creating your own English world today. And just like that, our journey through stories comes to an end for today. But your journey with English vocabulary is just beginning. You now have a powerful toolkit, a set of strategies that go beyond simple memorization. Remember Mark, the lost tourist, Maria, the ambitious chef, and David, the history student. Remember Leo, the creative writer, Sarah, the project manager, and all the others. Their stories are now your stories. Their success can be your success. The secret is not to learn more words, but to learn words more deeply. Use context. Practice active recall. Learn in chunks. Use mnemonics. Use the words. Understand their parts. Connect words to your life. Review consistently. Organize with mind maps. And immerse yourself in English. Choose one technique from today's episode. Just one. And try it this week. See how it feels. And don't forget to keep listening and learning with us. If you found this journey helpful and you want more stories to help you improve your English, make sure to subscribe to English in Advance. And please, hit that bell notification so you never miss a new lesson. When you get that notification, it's a reminder that your next step to English fluency is ready for you. Thank you for listening, and I'll talk to you in the next episode.